Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, events, or locations is purely coincidental. It contains themes of suspense, emotional tension, and family dynamics, and may include sensitive content. Reader discretion is advised. I stepped out of the car, dragging my suitcase across the uneven driveway of my uncle's house. The sun was already dipping behind the tall trees lining the quiet suburban street, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the lawn like dark fingers. My parents had insisted I spend the holidays here, saying it would be a fun change and a chance to bond with my uncle, whom I hadn't seen in years. I nodded politely over the phone, but a small knot of unease had already formed in my stomach. There was something different about the house than I remembered from childhood visits: bigger, older, almost too quiet. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, a sound that echoed strangely through the large, dimly lit hallway. My uncle greeted me with a warm smile and an overly firm hug. "It's good to have you here," he said, but there was something in his eyes that made me hesitate for a moment, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. The living room smelled faintly of old wood and a hint of something floral, almost cloying, and the furniture seemed too polished, too carefully arranged. I placed my bag down, noticing the silence that enveloped the house, broken only by the ticking of a grand, antique clock in the corner. He showed me to my room, a small but cozy space at the end of a narrow hallway. The bed was neatly made, the sheets crisp, but the room felt unusually cold, as if it hadn't been lived in for some time. As I unpacked my clothes, I kept catching glimpses of shadows moving in the corners of my vision, fleeting and unnerving. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling. "I'm probably just tired from the drive," I whispered to myself, but the unease lingered. Dinner was a quiet affair. My uncle talked about his work and the neighborhood in a monotone voice, while I nodded and smiled, attempting to seem engaged. I noticed the way he watched me over the rim of his glass, his gaze lingering a little too long. It made my skin prickle, though I tried not to let it show. The house felt different at night. The walls seemed closer, the shadows deeper, and every creak of the old floorboards set my heart racing. Before heading to bed, I looked out of my window. The yard stretched into darkness, silent except for the rustling of leaves in the wind. A part of me wanted to call my parents, to tell them everything felt off. But I hesitated, unsure if I was imagining things. Climbing into bed, I tried to relax, yet sleep was elusive. The quietness of the house pressed in around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just visiting my uncle for the holidays. Something about this place was watching, waiting, and I was already in its grasp. The next morning, I woke to the faint sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the old windows. My uncle had left a note on the kitchen table with breakfast instructions: eat quietly, no phones at the table, and please follow the house rules. I frowned at the formal tone. It felt more like a warning than guidance. As I prepared my toast and coffee, I noticed a list pinned to the fridge, each rule meticulously numbered. No loud noises after 9 p.m. Lock your bedroom door if you go out. Check in before leaving the house. The rules seemed excessive for a family visit, yet my uncle appeared cheerful and casual when he joined me for breakfast. His smile didn't match the strictness of the written rules, and that inconsistency made me uneasy. As the day went on, I tried to settle in, exploring the house and familiarizing myself with its rooms. The halls were narrow and dim, the wallpaper faded, and every corner seemed to hold a shadow, moving just slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. I passed by my uncle's study and noticed the door ajar. Inside, stacks of papers and books lay in neat piles, but the faint smell of tobacco lingered in the air despite no one smoking in the house. When I mentioned it, he laughed lightly, dismissing it as nothing, yet the laugh sounded hollow, echoing off the walls in a way that made my stomach twist. Later, I tried to strike up a conversation with my cousins, hoping for some light-hearted company. They were polite but distant, as if wary of being overheard. Small comments and half-smiles made me wonder if I was intruding on a secret world I didn't belong to. My uncle's behavior added to my unease. He insisted I join him for chores and errands, but watched me so closely that I felt every movement was being scrutinized. Even the simplest tasks, watering plants, folding laundry, felt like tests rather than casual activities. I began noticing patterns, how he always appeared unexpectedly in doorways, how his gaze lingered longer than normal, and how my cousins quickly changed topics when certain subjects came up. By mid-afternoon, the tension had become almost tangible. I wanted to relax, to watch some TV or read a book, but every sound in the house seemed amplified: the tick of the clock, the scrape of a chair on the floor, the faint creak of stairs. It was exhausting to be constantly alert, yet I couldn't help myself. I questioned my own perceptions, wondering if I was imagining things. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something about my uncle's house was wrong. Dinner that evening was even more formal than the night before. My uncle set the table with precision, and we ate in silence for most of the meal. When he did speak, his tone was casual, almost charming, yet underneath it lingered a subtle command that made my nerves tingle. I realized that my stay here wouldn't be like any holiday I'd had before. It was as if I were a guest in a house that operated on its own rules, and I had no choice but to follow. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in, and that my every move was being watched, shaping the unease that would only grow stronger in the days to come. The first night in my uncle's house was far from restful. Even after forcing myself to sleep, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, seemed magnified in the darkness. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing between rational explanations and an unshakable sense of unease. Somewhere in the house, a door clicked shut, though I was sure all of them were locked. My heartbeat quickened, and I told myself it was just the house settling, but the lingering tension made the room feel smaller, almost suffocating. Suddenly, I heard a soft shuffle outside my bedroom door. At first, I froze, thinking it must be my imagination. The sound repeated, this time deliberate, slow, and measured. Someone was moving quietly in the hallway. I gripped my blanket and held my breath, listening. The shuffle stopped, and then I felt a shadow flicker across the crack of the door. Panic surged through me, but I reminded myself it could only be my uncle checking in or one of the cousins sneaking out. I debated whether to call out, but my voice seemed swallowed by the thick walls. The tension in the room pressed against me, and I realized that fear was no longer just a feeling, it was physical, almost tangible. After what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps retreat down the hall. I exhaled shakily, convincing myself it was over, and tried to calm my racing heart. But the unease lingered, a gnawing sense that I wasn't truly alone, that the walls of the house themselves were aware of my presence. Sleep came in fits, interrupted by every minor noise, the wind rattling the windows, the distant hum of the street, even the ticking of the clock in my room. Each sound sent a shiver through me, reminding me that the house was alive with quiet movements, secrets, and watchful eyes. The next morning, I woke exhausted but determined to act normal. Breakfast passed in strained politeness, my uncle chatting about mundane topics while I barely listened, my mind replaying the previous night over and over. I noticed my uncle's subtle glances, the way he paused mid-sentence as if gauging my reaction, and I realized that the shadows in the house weren't just figments of imagination, they were reflections of his presence, always lingering, always observing. My cousins avoided eye contact, their hurried chatter revealing a tension they were clearly trying to mask. Throughout the day, I remained on edge, trying to understand the odd feelings that gripped me. Each room I entered seemed to hold the memory of the night before, the shifting shadows, the faint sounds, the silent warning of being watched. By evening, I felt trapped in a web of unease, unable to relax even for a moment. The house, once familiar from childhood visits, had transformed into a labyrinth of tension and suspicion, where every corner could hide secrets and every noise could signal danger. As I climbed into bed that night, the same shadowy feeling returned, stronger than before. My body tensed under the covers, my ears straining for any sign of movement. I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning, and that the holiday I had anticipated with excitement was about to become a test of courage and resilience unlike anything I had ever faced. As the days passed, a sense of unease began to settle over me like a heavy fog. My initial discomfort at my uncle's house had grown into something more persistent, a creeping suspicion that made even simple tasks feel like trials. I started noticing patterns in his behavior that I had ignored at first. The way he appeared unexpectedly in hallways, the subtle shifts in his tone when addressing me, and the way he always seemed to know more than I had told him. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence, but gradually, the coincidences became too frequent to dismiss. It was as if he had eyes everywhere, monitoring my every move. I attempted to reach out to my parents, sending texts and trying to call, but my messages were either delayed or unanswered. Each unsuccessful attempt made the walls of the house feel narrower, the rooms smaller, and my isolation heavier. My uncle, meanwhile, maintained his veneer of kindness, smiling and engaging in casual conversation, yet every gesture seemed calculated, every word chosen to maintain control. I found myself constantly walking on eggshells, hesitant to move, speak, or act freely, as though my slightest mistake could invite disapproval or scrutiny. Even my cousins, who once seemed like potential allies, were distant and guarded. I sensed their unease and wondered if they were aware of things I didn't yet understand. They laughed nervously at jokes, changed subjects abruptly, and avoided lingering near me for too long. A few half-hearted attempts at friendly conversation were met with forced smiles and quick retreats. It was as if the entire house operated under a silent code, one I had yet to decipher. Each interaction left me more anxious, more aware of the tension that seemed to cling to every corner of the rooms. By midweek, I realized I could no longer ignore the warning signs. Objects subtly moved in my room when I wasn't looking, doors I thought were locked seemed ajar, and the faint feeling of being watched persisted even in moments of solitude. My uncle's casual remarks occasionally hinted at knowledge of my private thoughts or plans, making me question whether I had any privacy at all. The air felt thick, oppressive, and I began to feel trapped not just physically within the house, but psychologically, bound by a web of fear and uncertainty. Despite the growing dread, I tried to remain calm and rational. I kept a mental log of events, noting inconsistencies in behavior and times when the house's silence felt most unsettling. Yet each night, as darkness fell, my anxiety peaked. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, the silence louder, and the stillness of the rooms heavier. Even small, ordinary noises, a floorboard creaking, the wind tapping against the window, set my heart racing. It was becoming painfully clear that this holiday was not going to be a simple visit, and that my instincts about the house and its inhabitants were not merely paranoia. A dangerous tension had begun to take hold, and I felt the first real pangs of fear, knowing that I might be caught in a situation far beyond my control. By the middle of the week, my unease had solidified into a tense awareness that something was deeply wrong. The small, unnerving incidents that I had dismissed at first now formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I had observed too much, the way my uncle lingered when I entered a room, the secretive glances he shared with my cousins, the strange rules that seemed designed to limit my freedom. It had become impossible to separate caution from instinct. I knew I had to confront the reality of the situation before it escalated further. One evening, after dinner, I finally gathered the courage to speak up. I asked him directly why certain doors were locked, why he seemed to know so much about my daily routines, and why the house felt suffocating rather than welcoming. At first, he laughed lightly, dismissing my questions as overthinking. But beneath the laughter, there was a sharpness, a controlled tension that made my skin prickle. I could see the calculations behind his eyes, the way he assessed my reaction, measured my fear, and weighed my compliance. It was chilling, yet I refused to back down. I demanded honesty, seeking clarity in the mounting fog of doubt. His response was a careful mixture of charm and menace. On one hand, he attempted to appear apologetic, explaining away the strict rules as concern for my safety. On the other, subtle remarks hinted at power and control, suggesting that he had the upper hand in ways I hadn't anticipated. I could feel the emotional tug-of-war, fear battling resolve, uncertainty competing with the need for answers. Each word he spoke carried layers of meaning, some benign, some darkly suggestive, and I realized that uncovering the truth would require more than confrontation. It would require vigilance and strategy. As the evening progressed, small but telling details began to emerge. The protective facade cracked, revealing glimpses of manipulation and control. I noticed how the family reacted around him, cautious, measured, silent, confirming suspicions I had only partially acknowledged. It was now clear that the house and the people within it operated under rules and patterns that I had no prior knowledge of. The oppressive atmosphere, the calculated kindness, the subtle threats, all of it was intentional. The realization hit me hard. This was not a normal family visit, and my instincts about danger were not unfounded. By the time I retreated to my room, the confrontation had left me shaken but determined. I understood, with growing clarity, the stakes of my situation. This was no longer merely an uncomfortable holiday, it was a test of courage, a battle to maintain autonomy and safety in a space designed to control and intimidate. Every creak of the floorboards, every glance from my uncle, became part of a larger picture I was beginning to decipher. I knew that the path forward would require careful planning, trust in my own judgment, and an unyielding resolve. For the first time, I recognized that escaping the oppressive web around me would demand not just courage, but cunning, awareness, and an unshakable will to reclaim my freedom. The following days were marked by constant vigilance. Each creak, each shadow, each glance from my uncle heightened my awareness and forced me to plan carefully. I realized that a direct confrontation or sudden flight could provoke him, and I wasn't willing to take that risk. Instead, I began observing his habits, noting when he left the house, the times the cousins were distracted, and the moments when I could move unnoticed. I mentally rehearsed escape routes, imagining myself slipping through the rooms, down the stairs, and past the garden gates without drawing attention. The house that had once seemed a warm refuge now felt like a trap, and every day of delay increased my anxiety. I also looked for allies. My cousins, though initially distant, showed small signs of understanding and sympathy. A fleeting look of concern, a whispered warning, or an abrupt change of subject hinted that they, too, were aware of the tension. I realized I could not face this situation alone, yet trust was fragile. I began devising strategies to gain their cooperation without alerting my uncle, carefully testing their reactions and building small moments of confidence. Every decision had to be precise. One wrong word or gesture could jeopardize the plan and escalate the danger. Each night, I worked quietly to gather small tools and resources that might help in my escape. A hidden phone charger, a spare set of keys I had borrowed discreetly, and careful memorization of the neighborhood layout became part of my nightly routine. Even the simplest acts, like walking to the kitchen or retrieving a book, were executed with heightened caution. I learned to move silently, to time my steps between creaks in the floorboards, and to mask my presence with routine tasks that seemed innocent. My body and mind were tense, constantly calculating risk, analyzing every detail of the environment. The emotional toll was immense. Fear mingled with determination, anxiety with resolve. I felt the weight of isolation pressing down on me, yet it also strengthened my resolve. Each day reinforced the importance of strategy and patience. The house no longer felt like a place to relax. It was a puzzle, a series of obstacles that I had to navigate carefully. Small successes, finding an open window, catching my uncle off guard for a moment, gaining subtle agreement from a cousin, provided the hope I needed to keep moving forward. Finally, after careful preparation, I felt ready to act. My escape plan had taken shape in my mind like a carefully choreographed sequence. Timing, movement, and communication all had to align perfectly. The stakes were clear. Failure could mean being trapped longer, facing greater intimidation, or worse. My heart pounded not only with fear, but also with the thrill of reclaiming control over my own freedom. I was determined to turn the tables, to move from a state of passive tension to one of active courage. The hours of waiting, observing, and planning had prepared me for this moment. Tonight, I would take the first steps toward escape, testing both my nerve and the fragile limits of the household's control. The night I chose to act was heavy with tension, every second amplified by the fear and anticipation that had built over days. I waited until my uncle had settled into his usual evening routine, confident he would not check on me immediately. My heart raced as I gathered my small, carefully hidden supplies and quietly crept toward the door. Every step was measured, every floorboard creak was counted and avoided. The house, once oppressive in its stillness, now seemed almost alive with my heightened awareness. Shadows stretched long and menacing across the hall, but I refused to let them paralyze me. As I moved through the corridor, I caught sight of my uncle's silhouette in the dim light of the living room. He seemed absorbed in a book, unaware of my silent advance. I took a deep breath and slipped past, clutching my bag tightly. A sudden creak behind me made me freeze. His head turned sharply, eyes narrowing, and for a terrifying moment, I thought my careful plan had failed. But then he returned to the book with a faint smile, almost as if he knew I was thinking of leaving and wanted to test my resolve. The tension in my chest eased slightly, and I pressed on, adrenaline driving every movement. Reaching the back of the house, I found the window I had scoped out earlier. The lock was stiff, but with careful effort, I forced it open just enough to slip through. The cold night air hit me, sharp and exhilarating, as I dropped silently into the overgrown garden below. I paused to ensure no one had noticed my departure, every rustle of leaves sounding like an alarm. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I refused to falter. I moved quickly, carefully avoiding the fences and hedges that could give away my presence. As I reached the street, freedom felt almost surreal, yet the danger was not fully behind me. I glanced back once and saw the faint light from my uncle's house spilling into the darkness. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, fear, relief, and a rush of triumph. I had navigated the labyrinth of rules, shadows, and watchful eyes, and I had reclaimed control over my own body and choices. My escape was not just physical, it was a victory over the psychological grip that had weighed on me for days. By the time I reached a neighbor's house, where I knew I could safely call my parents, my hands were trembling and my chest heaved with exhaustion. The ordeal had pushed me to the limits of fear and courage, teaching me the necessity of vigilance, strategy, and self-reliance. When my parents arrived, the relief of being in safe arms was overwhelming. The sense of empowerment that came from taking decisive action, however terrifying, lingered even as I recounted the events. That night marked a turning point, not only the escape from a threatening situation, but the realization that I could navigate fear with courage, and that even in the darkest moments, strength could be found. Back home, the familiar sights and sounds of my own room brought a comforting relief I hadn't realized I had been craving. The ordeal at my uncle's house lingered in my mind, replaying in fragments, the shadows, the rules, the unnerving glances, and the tense days of planning my escape. I felt a mix of exhaustion, relief, and lingering unease, knowing that even though I was physically safe, the emotional weight of the experience would take longer to lift. I replayed the events over and over, analyzing my own actions, the signs I had noticed too late, and the moments where courage had been my only ally. Each reflection brought a deeper understanding of both fear and resilience. My parents listened with shock and concern as I recounted the details. Their disbelief at first gave way to a mixture of anger and guilt. They hadn't anticipated the dangers that could arise from sending me away. Yet, amid their reassurances and comfort, I felt an unexpected sense of pride. I had navigated a situation that tested not only my ability to respond to fear, but also my capacity to think critically and act decisively under pressure. The experience had revealed an inner strength I hadn't fully recognized before. It was a harsh lesson, but one that shaped my confidence and self-reliance in ways words could hardly capture. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in my perspective. Ordinary concerns seemed smaller, and my instincts for evaluating people and situations grew sharper. I became more aware of the boundaries I needed to maintain, both physically and emotionally, and more assertive in setting them. The tension and danger I had faced served as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and trust in one's own judgment. I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that danger can exist in familiar places, and that courage is often required in the spaces we least expect. Despite the trauma, I also realized the value of reflection and healing. Writing down my experience, talking openly with friends and family, and seeking reassurance helped transform fear into understanding. I learned that the memory of fear does not have to dominate. It can become a tool for growth, awareness, and self-protection. Even when I felt vulnerable, I discovered that resilience can emerge from the smallest acts of planning, observation, and bravery. The lessons I carried forward were not just about survival, but about recognizing the importance of intuition, preparedness, and self-respect. Ultimately, the holiday that began with anticipation and unease concluded as a profound period of learning and self-discovery. I had confronted a situation that seemed insurmountable, navigated it with care, and emerged stronger. The experience left a lasting impression, a mix of caution and empowerment, shaping how I approached challenges in life thereafter. It was a story of fear, strategy, and courage, a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, clarity and determination can light the way. I was no longer just a guest in someone else's house. I had become the master of my own choices, and that sense of agency stayed with me long after the holiday ended. 99.